Good evening and welcome to the fourth episode of AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. This program is devoted to promoting conversations about diversity and inclusion in veterinary medicine. On tonight's program, I am delighted to welcome my very first co-host on the show, Angela Harrington. She is the National President of VOICE and a DVM student at Texas A&M. Hi, Angela.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm really excited that you'll be joining us tonight. Tonight we'll talk with Drs. Kauline Davis of Purdue and Kenita Rogers of Texas A&M, who will both talk about their experiences in working to improve campus climate with respect to diversity on their respective campuses. Before we get into our topic, I want to fully introduce our guests and provide a little bit of background on the AAVMC campus climate effort. So, Dr. Cipriani is the Director of Diversity Initiatives at Purdue University College of Veterinary Medicine. She's responsible for coordinating the development and implementation of initiatives to enhance diversity and inclusiveness within the college. Dr. Cipriani is also the co-director of the Center of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion in Veterinary Medicine, which is based on the right now only textbook in the profession devoted specifically to diversity and inclusion in the profession. So, hi, Kauline. How are you tonight?
Hello. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Angela. Hello, everyone out there.
Hi. And Dr. Rogers is on. She is unfortunately having a little bit of technical difficulties, but her audio is fantastic. So please don't think that she's not there. She is here. And so Dr. Rogers is currently a professor and associate dean for professional programs at Texas A&M University. She holds the Bridges Chair in Veterinary Medical Education and serves as the director for climate and diversity at the college. She is an LSU grad. I guess that's a Go Tigers. I'm not and you know, there's a big Mardi Gras thing. We're just past Mardi Gras. A small animal internist and oncologist. She is a nationally recognized teacher in veterinary medical education, and like Kauline, she is super duper awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. How are you tonight?
I'm fantastic. Glad to be here.
Great. So a little bit of history before we kind of dive right in. In 2010, the 10 schools in the Southeast region held a conference called the Southeast Regional Diversity Matters Symposium. And this is a meeting that happens every other year. And one of the outcomes of that 2010 meeting was that participants really wanted to conduct a climate study for those 10 individual institutions. Well, we said, well, if we're going to do 10, we might as well do 28. So this morphed into a national study on climate on our campuses related to diversity. We were really interested in seeing how some of our smaller demographic populations were faring, how comfortable they were they experiencing any types of harassment? Did they have mentors? Did they have friends and support that they needed to really kind of maximize their time while in vet school? So the study was actually conducted in the spring of 2011, and all of our institutions participated. At the close of the study, every school that participated received individualized data, and a number of the schools really seemed to take that data, study it, crunch it, and launch some specific efforts to improve climate on their campuses. And so tonight we're going to talk specifically about some of the things that maybe Texas A&M and Purdue have done during these last 5 years related to campus climate. I will also mention that we were able to publish a paper from the original climate study, and I will do a quick screenshot just in case folks are interested in seeing that. It was published last year in the Journal for Veterinary Medical Education. It's called the Survey of College Climates at all 28 U.S. colleges and schools of veterinary medicine, preliminary findings. And I was joined, here we are, I was joined in writing that paper with Dr. Paige Carmichael, who was the co-PI on the study. So with that, to kick us off, Dr. Rogers, what are some of the things that you kind of learned from the 2011 survey and some of the subsequent studies that you've done at Texas?
I think a lot of the initial findings were similar to what we found on our campus climate surveys at Texas A&M, and they really showed that we were uncomfortable talking about certain things, perhaps, particularly about sexual orientation and religion. But I think that some of the even more important things that came out a little bit later as we worked through it were, number one, for me, it was really gratifying to see that the students really cared about these issues, because as we continued to do some of these surveys, the response rate was really, really high, above 75 and 80%, which tells me that that really was a topic that was important to people. I think it also showed me, anyway, that everybody's definition of diversity, of climate, and perhaps how we ought to behave in a professional setting was very, very broad. And I think some of the things that we learned the most from and have become much more intentional about are actually some of the diversity attributes, like some of the invisible disabilities, mental illness, wellness issues, physical disabilities, perhaps, some of them, and to make sure we're being welcoming to those populations. Language, that we used inclusive language at all levels. And then I think, again, thinking about students that might be quote-unquote different for reasons that we don't even think of in diversity sometimes, like parents, veterinary students with families, etc., that everybody has needs, everybody has attributes that we can do better at making them feel more welcome, and this is a fun place to come every day. So I'd say that was some of our big take-home messages.
Great. And Kauline, Dr. Cipriani, what about it? Purdue?
Yes, we found some of the same things. I am struck by what Kenita said about students, because we found exactly the same thing. Students having the most difficulty talking about or communicating across difference when that difference is religion and sexual identity. So we found the same thing. Just to give you a snapshot of our student body here in the year that climate survey was taken, we found that the average Purdue DVM student is a single, white, able-bodied, heterosexual female from a suburb in the Midwest. And I think that may be the average DVM student almost anywhere. So except maybe the Midwest part, but that's the average Purdue student. Some good things that we found is that almost 90% of our students look forward to attending class every day, so we were excited about that. We found that the students rarely hear racial stereotypes, but when they do, it's most likely from another student or a faculty member and least likely from a staff or community member. So that was really interesting to us. We talked about whether or not, that's a function of students really spend the most time, especially veterinary students, spend the most time with their peers and on campus, as opposed to, undergraduates may spend more time in the community. But that's one thing that we found that was pretty interesting. And I guess the final thing that I would like to point out about our survey is that a lot of our students are aware of the organization VOICE. They're aware of what it stands for. They're aware of what the national and our chapter does, but they don't necessarily come to all our events. So that was something that we hope to encourage more students to come to. We kind of delved into that a little bit deeper, and I think it goes right back to Dr. Rogers' comments about all of us needing to look at diversity in its broadest terms, and I think a lot of times we can all get locked into just certain facets of diversity, and that at least on our campus, our VOICE chapter has really been trying to present topics and workshops that embody the broad definition of diversity. So
great shout out to VOICE. So what have you done with the data? I mean, it's some institutions said, wow, thanks for this data, and then we revisited it a couple of years ago. But I do want to let folks know that we will be redoing this survey right now we're targeting late April, early May, and this will be a 360 survey, so it will include, because what is it, 12,000, almost 13,000 vet students isn't enough. This year we'll actually include graduate students, we'll include faculty, administrators, and staff in the new survey, so that we can kind of really get an understanding of the full climate at an institution, recognizing that different populations have different needs. So, Kauline, since you just finished, tell us a little bit about, well, what did you do with the data?
Yeah, we actually looked at our data very carefully, and we compared it to the national, and then we presented it. We presented it to the DVM students. I made that presentation as a part of their grand rounds schedule, so we got most of them in the room for that class. And we have a diversity action committee that consists of faculty, staff, and students. So the faculty members of the diversity action committee actually shared the data at their faculty meetings so that the faculty would have a really good understanding. The entire veterinary administration here at Purdue kind of got together and worked really hard to get that high response rate. We also had a high response rate, but we were kind of all behind it and encouraged the students to complete it, and said it was important for us to understand as a academic profession, and it worked. So of course, after you do that, everyone was interested in hearing what we learned from that data. So we shared it pretty broadly across the college. So our faculty got to hear it, students got to hear it, and yeah, we shared it.
And Dr. Rogers?
Yeah, so certainly the same thing Kauline just talked about, tried to get the information out to people, and then tried to say, okay, it's always easy to say, I don't know what to do with this, or I don't know how to move forward. But I think the important thing in this realm is two things, really. One is to do something, and figure out strategically how you can make really an impact in these areas, because it's not just the students in this case. We all work at large major universities. It could be in a workplace setting outside where these issues are going to be exactly the same. So how do we integrate learning, integrate understanding, integrate broader knowledge of these topics into people's lives, number one. And I think it's one of those topics, diversity, climate, etc., really needs to come from the top. It needs to be role modeled really well. So I would say two or three things we did once we sort of shared the data. One is, when we do have instances, whether they be microaggressions or some other type of behavior that we're concerned about, we try to have either the dean or myself actually directly address it as soon as we know about it. And we want to send a message, of course, that this is how we as professionals need to behave. It's how we need to move forward, and how we need to be respectful of everyone regardless of differences, and how important it is, in not only in veterinary medicine, but in business, in every walk of life. And then the other way I think we've tried hard to show that it matters and makes a difference is to put things into place in the selections process through our interviews. We happen to do multiple mini interviews here, and every year for the last 3 to 4 years we've made sure we had a cultural competency scenario within the interview, sort of to send the message that this is important to us. Inculcating things within the curriculum. We have medical Spanish, we have cultural competency, etc., and things like that, community outreach avenues, the things just to make sure that, this is everyday life, this is important. I want you to be able to be a great surgeon, but I also want you to be able to be a great communicator. I want you to be a great people manager, and I want you to be very kind. And all of those things are equally important, I think, in a great healthcare professional.
Great.
Yeah, so I just need to piggyback on that and say that we, very similar to Texas A&M, we also ask cultural competency questions during our interview. We don't do the multiple mini, but we do ask those questions, and we try to gauge a student's position on that during the interview. We also have both co-curricular and curricular opportunities. The first year students take an ethics class. I sit on a panel with our Director of Student Services, Dr. Jim Wiseman, and we have my faculty advisor for Voices, Dr. Henry Green. He's a cardiologist here, and we do a panel in that class. We've been doing it now for a couple of years, where we give them different scenarios that are basically about microaggressions, possible microaggressions, and we talk about it in class and ask the students, what do they think about these things. So we encourage the students to always be thinking about their contribution to the climate of inclusive excellence that we're trying to foster here at Purdue. And we also have opportunities for faculty and staff to do the same things. So, because as Dr. Rogers said, diversity is everybody's business. So
I'm going to hand the mic to Angela, along with a question, since she is a student at Texas as well as the National Voice president. I'd love to know kind of your take on what's happening at Texas A&M, but also give you the opportunity to ask some questions of our guests.
Okay. I think since I've been at Texas A&M for the past 2.5 years, the biggest thing I've noticed is voice and broad spectrum, which was formerly Ultramate, but both have grown a lot. Just for my first year, the number of activities they did was very limited, and now they're doing much more. And I think that came from a lot of help from the dean's office being very supportive of those clubs and having mentors and faculty and staff that were very supportive and coming to meetings and having their input there. So I have seen a lot of growth in the field just in the short period of time. But one thing that I always kind of wondered about this is, what are the biggest contributing factors to the lack of diversity in veterinary medicine?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
So I'll let Dr. Rogers go first.
Why, thank you, Kauline. I would love to. Yeah. So obviously it's a huge issue, right? It's one where we recognize now, and I think much more acutely now, what our profession looks like. And as everyone knows, in the literature, we're sometimes called the whitest profession. And there's a lot of reasons for that, probably. Some of it has been education access. Some of it has been, I believe, competition, if you will. If you are a young man or woman of color, or any other underrepresented minority, and you are leaning toward a healthcare profession of some kind, there are a lot of opportunities, both financial and help and otherwise, and it's in some of the other health professions, particularly the medical and sometimes the dental fields, pharmacy, that also have exciting careers. So there's a lot of things like that. I think the cool thing today is that everybody sort of looks at it and goes, oh, we really need to do some work on this. And so there are a lot more national discussions, both locally and nationally, on what can we do. And I think it's one of those things where not only do we have to make the profession seem as exciting as I think it is. I mean, I love it. I'm so proud to be a veterinarian, and I'm very happy that one of my daughters wants to be a veterinarian. I mean, I see a great future for us all. But we need to reach out to either parts of our state that aren't as well served. We need to get into the minds and hearts of young people and their families to do a better job of recruiting. And we need to understand that we are not serving all of the people we need to serve unless we are reaching out and educating a much broader population of individuals than what we're doing today.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Dr. Rogers just said. I have two other um, ideas to offer. My colleague, Dr. Sandra San Miguel, our Associate Dean of Engagement, actually has studied this a little bit, a socialization. So socialization of our children. She looked at veterinary toys. I forget over what time period, but they were almost overwhelmingly, they look like our classes today. So overwhelmingly Caucasian and female. So there, people aren't making well now we have the new little girl on some kiddie show that I'm not going to remember. I'm sorry. Help me out here, Lisa.
Doc McStuffins.
Yes, but before Doc McStuffins, many of the toys were Caucasian and female. So she actually published on that, and that we're actually socializing a lot of other kids who fall outside of that demographic to think, okay, I can't be a vet. This is not for me. So there is that issue, and I would also like to add that there's a lot of misinformation, incorrect information out there in terms of what it takes to go to veterinary school, what it takes. I mean, I've been recruiting now for almost 10 years for this profession. I meet lots of different people at booths, not just in the state of Indiana, but nationally, and there's a lot of incorrect information out there. So students who are sometimes on smaller campuses that may not have a true health vet advisor, maybe a health professions advisor, that may not be as knowledgeable as to what it takes for a student to be competitive to get into a DVM program. They get incorrect information, and sometimes they get frustrated, and they may have wanted to do veterinary medicine, but they end up choosing another health profession. There's also pressure from family members who think that you need to do human medicine to be a real doctor. I mean, these are things that many of us have heard out there at recruiting booths. So I think there is, as Dr. Rogers said, there is an education that needs to be done for the general public at large in terms of what exactly does it mean to be a veterinarian, all the things that can be done with a DVM degree, and how a student from high school, from middle school, what does that student need to be doing to maximize their competitiveness in this competitive entry in the competitive playing field that is entry into a DVM program.
Yeah. So one of the questions that Angela sent me in advance of tonight's show had to do with the finding that students are uncomfortable around issues, kind of engaging issues around religion and sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity. And I was kind of curious to know what you all may have tackled in dealing with these subjects, and how do you facilitate kind of constructive engagement, education, and conversation around those issues specifically. I mean, a lot has actually changed since 2011 with the Supreme Court ruling last year, but then we've also now got, we're in the midst of the early midst of what seems to be a very lively presidential run. And so, there's a lot of, I guess, angst around these issues specifically. And so I'm kind of curious to see, to hear, I guess, what you all have done or hope to accomplish in that particular space around religion and sexuality.
Does Kauline get to go first on this one?
Yes. Yes, I think that's fair.
Just asking.
So when you were asking the question, Lisa, I was thinking, I'm not going to air any dirty laundry. No. But I think that one of our more difficult conversations, I would say, and let me back up and say that here, our administration really believes that helping to facilitate these difficult conversations for our students is part of their education in terms of becoming a professional. So these are difficult conversations no matter what age you are, no matter whether you're a student, a staff member, a faculty member, and they may continue to be difficult for some people well into the next couple of decades. So, we just kind of approach it like that, head on. Let's have, and I also believe in letting the students drive the conversation. So our Voice e-board wanted to tackle specifically the differences of what seems to be the differences in approach to sexual identity and Christianity. So as you guys know, there are some groups of Christians who believe that LGBTQ is a lifestyle and a choice and should not be chosen if you hope to get into heaven. And there are other Christian groups who have a more broad
interpretation,
an interpretation of what what it would look like, what you need to do in terms of getting into heaven. So our students were actually having this conversation amongst themselves, and there was a speaker that was invited onto campus, a bishop who is a gay bishop and who travels the country talking about how he believes when he reads his Bible that there's a place for him. And so the students thought, hey, we could create an event around this. So we designed an event and we invited their peers as well as faculty and staff. So all our Voice events are open to everyone at the vet school. So we created an event around, if you are so inclined, please come with us to hear this speaker. And then we asked an on-campus pastor who had the opposite view about LGBT and lifestyle and Christianity to give a talk here. And so hear both talks, and then let's facilitate a discussion about this. And the discussion was facilitated very aptly by our Dr. Henry Green. And it was difficult. There were, at the discussion, so of course everybody didn't go to both events. Some people went to both, but some people only went to one. So we came together to have this discussion afterwards, and it was very difficult because there were tears. People, it brought up bad memories for people depending on which session they were in, and we just powered through it. And we talked about first of all, we validated everyone's feelings, but we also talked about so what are some ways that we can meet in the middle. So we get that certain people are never going to change their beliefs around a lot of things, not just LGBT. So how do we work collegially with those people? How do we have conversations with them without that being at the forefront of does that need to frame every conversation we have with our peers? So it was very good. It was difficult. I'm glad we did it. I wouldn't mind waiting another couple of years before we had to do it again. But I'm so proud of all of our PVM family members who participated. I'm proud of the students who put it together. And hopefully we grew and we learned from that experience, and we can have it again.
In a couple of years.
Yeah, you need to rest up. So that's fantastic. I mean, that's fantastic, and I think the way to address these issues often is best with great facilitation and directly. Because we can skirt around a lot of things. I think we've taken a little different approach, and I really love what you did. I think the key for us, at least, or at least our strategy for long-term success, is to say, okay, what do we really believe? And if we believe that everyone has value and deserves respect, how can we show that? How can we model that? And so how can we celebrate difference? And so a couple of things we've done, I'll just give a couple of examples, trying to build the skill sets that make everyone a little more accepting and have the skills to listen a little better. One of those is there's and I'm sure it's on every campus, an Aggie Allies, which is a training program to allow there to be safe spaces for those of the LGBT community to come in and know that they are safe, And so everyone in our dean's office, et cetera, has had this training and proudly displays the signs and that sort of thing, and perhaps that's one thing. We do a lot of work with our website to make sure, again, we're celebrating the broad spectrum, our voice chapter, et cetera. The other tact I've taken is we've been very fortunate here on our campus that they have put some money behind improvements in climate, diversity, equity from all the colleges and units. And so one of the things we've done with this is we've actually had 40-hour mediation training that we now have 73 trained mediators in the college, both faculty and staff. And the cool thing about that, really, from my perspective, is that we're trying to develop a common language of conflict across the college, but also because simply the skills that you learn with that are better listening, perspective taking, understanding that there's more than one side to an argument. So regardless of whether you really learn to mediate or ever do a true mediation, developing skill sets that I think help you to model and show others how to be a little more respectful, to pay attention and recognize that others can be different, and we can still have these very, very difficult conversations. So I'll throw those in there.
Great. Wonderful. So Angela, questions from you.
Well, I heard you mention students who are at your school currently that may not feel their environment's very inclusive, and you mentioned that there are Aggie allies, but what are some of the other resources out there for students who may be in that position right now?
Are you talking to Dr.
Just at Purdue or at A&M?
Okay. Well, we have a center. We have several centers, and one of our centers is a LGBTQ center for education. All of our centers are based on education around these different populations. So we have a Black Cultural Center here on campus. We have a Latino Cultural Center. We have a Native American Educational Cultural Center. We have an Asian American, and I realize that there are some who think that we may have too many centers. So that's a whole nother argument that I'm sure, Lisa, you want to have as a topic of a different podcast. But we do have several centers on this campus for individuals who want to spend some time with like-minded individuals, whether that be racial/ethnic sameness or share a religious affiliation. We have a Islamic center. So I think there is still a place, although some would disagree with me, in higher education to allow space for separate cultures to be together. I think these spaces can also serve as an educational space for people who are not from that center. Not from that culture. So so I think that they're important. There are some people, I know that I've spoken to families who are looking at our College of Veterinary Medicine for their student to attend, and depending on their background, they ask about these things, especially if they are not from close by West Lafayette, Indiana, or from out of state. They want to know where can my child go to church? Where can my child attend a mosque? Where can my child hang out with people that they will feel very comfortable with hanging out with? So these are questions that we get. So our centers serve as a positive recruitment tool for us, and we're pretty proud of the work that they do on campus.
Yeah, I'd say that's sort of the way Texas A&M operates, as well as having sort of focused center type approach, as well as I know Purdue, I think, has this as well. On campus, a Vice President for Diversity office that helps us to navigate difficult situations or questions. From a campus perspective, there are several sort of groups, or I'll call them task forces or committees. One of them is called the President's Council for Climate and Diversity, and they're actually the ones who read the reports that are sent in every year and make some judgment calls on who has really made impact in their college or unit and who should get some reward financially for that they can plow back into diversity and climate and equity issues. A group that I'm on is called the Diversity Operations Committee, and there's a representative from every college and university that works with the Vice President of Diversity and meets very frequently. She also has a diversity leaders group, so if you're titled leadership, if you will, in diversity, belong to that group. To kind of basically share best practices, I think, is probably the best way to say that those groups operate. I think the other thing is internally in the colleges, and this is done differently everywhere because you have different faculty and different staff and different interests and different ways of managing. But for the students specifically, there are a number of mentor groups and that sort of thing. And when we have someone who we figure out would like to share and be a part of things, we try to match them up with the appropriate faculty, staff, and otherwise. And we do have a college committee called the Council for Diversity and Professionalism that also has faculty, staff, students, grad students, undergraduate students, etc. on it. Because I think it's more about hearing perspectives. But I learn something new every single year because there's a new situation or a new individual that has an attribute that needs some support. And over time, we sort of learn what those are. I don't think we do them all well, and I don't think we've done them all yet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Great. Wonderful. Other questions, Angela?
I do. I was just wondering if there were some ways that pre-veterinary students could find out the climate of a potential school they're applying to, whether this data has been published in a way that can be accessed by college students or high school students so they could understand maybe where they would like to apply.
Ooh.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We certainly have our Diversity Office of Diversity Initiatives online, so you can find us as a part of the website. We talk about what we are doing. When we have the opportunity to talk to these groups about entering into the career and considering Purdue, and we do quite a bit of that, certainly in-state, but also nationally, we talk about how diversity and inclusion and fostering a climate of inclusive excellence is a very important core value for the College of Veterinary Medicine. So, we share that openly, broadly, proudly, and, we communicate it whenever we have a chance to. So it's part of the spiel that we give students and families when they seek us out for information on our vet school.
Yeah, I think in being very intentional about it so that, again, when you're out recruiting, etc., it is just a natural part of your what you're sharing about your college. Certainly being very, again, intentional about the message you portray on your website, how you behave if they come to campus for interviews, that sort of thing, how people are felt to be included. And there's probably no substitute for direct student to student. So
absolutely.
We certainly have some student ambassadors. We have people at giving tours, students giving tours and things at interviews and all. And again, we certainly cannot control that. What we hope is that we have created an environment that they feel comfortable sharing. We just recently went through an accreditation site visit over Thanksgiving this past fall. And again, that was one of the things they mentioned, that it seemed to be, from their interactions with students, faculty, staff, it seemed to be a very good work environment, work and learning environment. But the key is not to rest on that or say, oh, that's just great. The fact of the matter is, for certain individuals, it's probably still not. And the key is to be able to figure some of those things out and try to figure out how we can be better.
Great. So, in looking forward, knowing that the next the next study is coming down the pike in just a matter of months, actually. What kinds of things are you looking to learn from the next generation of this study? And I mean, this will be a new generation of students, as well as really some concrete data on other populations, non-student populations within the colleges. So, Dr. Rogers, what are you looking forward to?
I think right now, and I consider it part of this whole spectrum of diversity and climate, is really the whole wellness issues, which have really come to the forefront in the last 2 or 3 years. And so SAVMA has done a really nice, very I think fairly well done wellness survey that the students have participated in very high numbers, and that data will be coming out soon. So really the invisible disabilities, things we do for wellness, I think I'm looking forward to pieces of that. If some of those sort of come forward as things we can do better, and in terms of supporting certain cohorts of students. I'm interested in change over time, probably not only locally but nationally, hopefully for the better. And I hope it shares some things maybe I've just never thought of, because I really think we all are looking for what is the next frontier, not only in numbers and making sure that there's great educational access for all, but probably to make sure that, again, some of the smaller, less marginalized groups that are smaller, that we hopefully can pick some of those up and try to be helping everybody that we can and making sure we have great support.
Dr. Spriani.
Yeah, so, I think I'm looking forward to certainly see the differences between the results from this survey and the one that we did back in 2011, was it, Lisa, 2010?
Getting some echo.
And I hope that even though those results, the ones that were specific to our college, to Purdue students, indicated that it was rare to be harassed based on your race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, I hope that number is even smaller. And I hope that a greater number of students would indicate by their responses to, the different questions that this is a place where they see and appreciate our efforts to create a really good educational environment for them. And I hope they also appreciate, as we spoke about earlier, that diversity is so much bigger than the phenotypic diversity that so many of us like to focus on sometimes, and that there's all different types of diversity in the class, in your profession, and will be in your clientele, and that they appreciate that and appreciate the work that we do to create that kind of environment.
Great.
So ask a question about that, Lisa.
This is my show. So I wanted to kind of mention a few other highlights that will be in the new survey. This year we have changed the way that we ask the parent question. It had options for parents in the previous survey. However, it assumes primarily a heterosexual parentage. And so now individuals will be able to identify the gender of the parents for which they're recording information about. We are going to be using Pell Grant eligibility for undergrad as a proxy for socioeconomic status in this survey to kind of get some kind of sense of class, because it's a fairly hard thing to measure in a survey like this. But we found that Pell Grant eligibility is going to be a pretty good proxy and one that is used often in the literature. We've added a question about veteran status, which is something that was not included in the previous survey as well. And I think that we've also reframed questions around whether or not we think the institution is doing too much regarding diversity. And we've specified things that question to different topics. So do you think that the institution is too accommodating of issues around race, issues around gender, sexuality? We've refined a number of the questions also to really kind of get a sense of whether or not people think the institution is treating the members of the community fairly. So those are some of the kind of refinements that we've made to the instrument in the 5 years since the previous survey. It's going to be a pretty big project. I'm delighted that we have a graduate student from the DVM MPH program at Virginia, Maryland, LaCheryl Ball, who is working on that project with me. And later this year, we'll be doing a podcast on some preliminary findings, hopefully, if the sky doesn't fall. So we're at about 45 minutes now. So I want to start talking a bit about what should folks be thinking about in terms of climate for any viewers that may be outside of the traditional academic environment, but what advice might either of you give to individuals who may be running a clinical practice at a clinic or in industry or just in other kinds of practice environments? Dr. Rogers, I'm pitching to you.
I think several things. One is I know that most I'll focus on the clinical practice environment. I think most individuals who own or are associates at a practice fully understand that the key to being at least financially successful and probably successful in all ways is about relationship building. And these relationships are, again, about respect and caring, empathy, compassion, all the things we think are important for a healthcare professional. So, so diversity, understanding difference, being able to account for difference is probably very well known. But we can all get better in that, and we're all fully learning throughout our whole lifetime. So I think being open and willing to learn, to embrace, to attend professional development, if you will, whether it be CE or otherwise. There's a lot of opportunities now for that to get better and better. And I think then the other thing is to hold, I love it when practitioners who are hiring or employers of our graduates tell me what we're doing well, but I also don't mind when they tell me what we can do better at, and I like them to hold us accountable for certain things, and we will change over time with certain things. So this is one of those areas that I'm always happy to hear about, professionalism, how people are treated, etc. So don't hesitate to hold us accountable for the product that we're putting out and telling us what's important.
Great.
Yeah, so I think my most important piece of advice for practitioners and clinicians out there who want to learn more about this is to get online at humancentered.org and sign up for our diversity and inclusion certificate, where you can learn about some of these issues specifically as they apply to veterinary medicine. So just to pull out from one of those educational modules, microaggressions are a big deal. They're a big deal in our society. They certainly are happening in our colleges, in our classrooms, in our teaching hospitals. They're happening everywhere. And, you know, some people have never heard of them. Well, they have never heard of the word microaggression, but a lot of times when you give these same people an example of what it might look like, they understand it. So I think that any opportunity, as Dr. Rogers said, that an individual has to expand their understanding of some of these issues, to become more interculturally competent as an individual so that you can communicate better with your coworkers, with your staff, with your boss, with your clientele in all those different settings. I would strongly encourage people to take advantage of it and become more aware. A lot of sticky situations or unpleasant situations happen because people are just they don't know what is, or they're not sure what is, or what might be perceived as offensive for a certain individual who comes from a certain background. So I would just encourage us all to become educated and learn as much as we can so that those incidents will become less and less in our workplace and in our schools and colleges.
Great. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we do have folks that are watching live, so thank you for tuning in tonight. If you have a few questions before we wrap, you can post them on the event page. And I am moderating that page, and will certainly pass those questions along. You can also post them after the event, and I will certainly ask our speakers to provide some answers as well. So, Angela, do you have any some additional questions before we start winding down?
I think one of the things that's always been on my mind a lot recently is finding a job. It's getting to the point where I'm starting to think about that. And so what are some advice that you think for students who are in that position, and what can they look for in a potential job for an inclusive environment?
So, again, it's another great place for a direct conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of little things that a lot of the great practices do, including signage, their website showing inclusivity through photographs and messaging, and the mission statements. But I think also asking about hiring practices, asking about how certain conflict situations might be dealt with, etc. It's always a little uncomfortable as a new kid on the block to ask some of those questions, but I think there's some very professional ways to ask these questions to make sure that the environment is one that you believe you're going into your first job, which is your most important one, that you're going to be in an environment that's great for you, supportive for you, and is, again, inclusive and respectful.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I think that there's absolutely a professional way to ask about things like, you know, religious holidays and how does one handle, you know, being away, for instance, for observation of one's religious and practices. So another thing that I remember from my own safe zone training, which was a while ago now, but has stuck with me, is, you know, the signage and having the safe zone sticker up is something that people in that LGBTQ individuals are looking for. So heterosexuals, and this is what I was told, and I completely agree with it. As a heterosexual myself, I could see his point, the person who was doing the training. Heterosexuals rarely, if ever, are on the lookout for signs that this may be an LGBTQ-friendly environment. But individuals in the LGBTQ are always on the lookout. So anything you can do to, and I think that's true of a lot of different groups. So the artwork on your wall says a lot to people from different backgrounds. So things like the artwork, you know, the physical space, the physical environment, I think they all hold certain clues and signs to the people in the minority of the population who may be looking for those. So just, again, educate yourself on what those may be, and if it's important to you as an individual to work in a place like that, be on the lookout when you go in for the interviews for those kinds of clues that this place is really inclusive.
Yeah. So that was a great question, and so I think that in the show notes that I typically will add to the end of the podcast recording, I'll include some resources on how to ask those questions, as well as some things in the physical environment that might be, I guess, climate cues for, whether or not, if you're interviewing potentially in a clinical practice, are there materials that are available in languages other than English? Are doorways big enough to accommodate a wheelchair or someone on crutches? Are things high? Are they low? What kinds of images are on the walls? What does the staff? Who are the staff? And how comfortable they look? And it is. I would argue in some ways that we talk a lot about when we're applying, particularly for undergraduate programs, about kind of fit, not just whether or not you like the school, the name, and what their offerings are, but whether or not you fit there. And I think that many of us, I think all of us are kind of also looking for fit, certainly in vet school, but also in the general work environment too. Is this somewhere that I can bring my whole self every single day? So that was a great question. So I will definitely add some of those resources. And I actually do have a show planned later this spring, specifically inviting some career counselors from some of our member institutions to come and talk very specifically about this topic, even things like disclosure, and at what point should you, could you, would you disclose certain bits of information about yourself, and for your own benefit to assess fit or not. And so we'll be doing a show on that hopefully later this spring. So great question. Any other questions that you have? I know you had a list there.
I do have one final question.
Sure.
I get asked a lot of why do I care about diversity? Why is it so important to me? So I just wanted to ask that to you, and why do you care about this, and why is that your passion?
I did not enter college to become a diversity professional. I have to say that my background is in microbiology, and I started working part-time for our Women in Science program here at Purdue while I was finishing up my PhD in microbiology, and that was my first introduction to diversity in higher education. And I guess simplistically I can say I fell in love with it as a topic and a field, mostly because I knew that I had experienced some of the things that the young women that I was working with in the Women in Science program were experiencing then. I had experienced it 10 and 15 years before, and I started thinking about the students 10 and 15 years out, and is it going to be the same? Does it have to be the same? Is there a way to make it better? And at some point I decided that these questions were important enough to me as an individual and a professional that I could and should make this my career. I have a daughter who is about to turn 18 and about to become a college student, and I think about some of the things that have been happening on our campuses this year and some of the things that happened when I was an undergraduate 25 years ago and how similar they are, and I just hope that they become less and less, and I hope that if and when I have grandchildren and they end up on one of these campuses, it's a much better environment. I guess that's why it's important to me in a nutshell.
So before Kenita leads in, I want to share how Kauline got swept up in veterinary medicine. Both Kauline and we just get to hang around one of the coolest professions ever. But this is the power of networking for anyone interested. Kauline and I were at, I think it was the HBCU Up meeting here in DC, I guess nearly a decade ago. Yes. And she was working in the provost's office at Purdue. And we were at a reception, and I was at a table by myself, and she rolled over and said, "Hey, hi, my name is," and I said, "Hi, my name is,"
I'm not
very much like we were kindergartners in the sandbox. And, you know, we got to talking. It was a very brief initial conversation like, "Hey, I'm looking for a new job, and I'm really interested in staying in diversity and STEM and all of those things." And I chuckled and said, "Oh, well, there's a great job that just posted across campus at the veterinary school. You would probably be perfect for that." And a month later, she called me, and she was relocating to the veterinary school. Yeah. And we have been close colleagues and friends ever since. So go to meetings and go to the reception, I guess, is my takeaway. So Dr. Rogers.
Well, compared to that story, I'm very Johnny-come-lately to this. I've been at A&M for 32 and a half years. Did my residency here. I'm an internist and oncologist, and I came to the dean's office about 10 years ago. And diversity didn't really come onto my radar as a responsibility or as something that I really thought and learned a lot about until maybe the last 5 or 6 years. But as I've gotten, learned so much more, had so much more understanding, gotten to have great colleagues like the two of you and wonderful students like Angela, you know, the bottom line is what I really, really care about is I want Texas A&M and veterinary medicine really to be the best we can be for our students. And so my view is we are not the best unless we're diverse. We are not the best unless we have an inclusive climate. We are not the best unless we have, you know, good skills to handle conflict. And we really need to recognize and celebrate how wonderful difference can be, and that, frankly, this profession is for everyone. And so those things speak to me and make me want us as a college, but certainly us as a profession, to do better and better and better over time.
I love that statement. This profession is for everyone. I'm going to have to quote you on that, Dr. Rogers.
That would be fabulous. Fabulous.
She brought it on home. So I think that we will wrap on that note. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining me tonight. And thank you for our Watch Live viewers. Hi, how are you? Please feel free to continue dropping questions, and certainly, like I said, we will make sure that you get those questions answered when I post the final version of the podcast in a few days. The next podcast, episode 5, will take place on March 3rd, and it will feature Ms. Patricia Lowry, who is the grande diva of diversity in veterinary medicine. She will be on the show. We'll be recording in the midst of the AAVMC 50th anniversary annual conference, and she will be talking about the history of diversity in veterinary medicine and academic veterinary medicine specifically. And then later in the month, Stacy Pritt from the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative will be joining us to talk a bit about that organization's efforts to promote and develop women for leadership positions in the profession. So with that, we will sign off. Thank you so very much again for each of you for joining us, and we will see you in a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.